Okay, everybody. Okay, everybody. I had a false start there. Okay, everybody. We are progressing and proceeding in our consideration of how standard norm referenced instruments are created and what we should be looking out for there in the process of selecting one of these instruments to actually administer to our clients. Now, in creating a standard norm referenced instrument, once the aspect of language, speech and language, that the instrument is going to address is settled on by the author has to ask him or herself, well, what population is this assessment instrument intended for? What population? What group of people? And in making that decision and making sure that the actual assessment instrument will work with that population, will yield a valid and reliable results, the author has to be beware of culture bias, has to make sure that that assessment instrument truly identifies the typical language behavior, speech and language behavior of the population, and distinguishes typical behavior from problematic behavior, delayed or disordered, right? That's what these instruments are really intended to do. Beware of culture bias. So in any event, what the author has to do is first define ages and or grades for whom the assessment instrument is intended. Children, adults, if children, grades, even adults, college, employed, retired. And then the individual has to the author in creating these instruments ultimately has to establish a scoring basis for a basis for evaluating clients that this instrument will be applied to by clinicians once the assessment instrument is created. So what the author of these instruments has to do is sample performance of populations that actually represent each age or grade level that the information is designed for. Sample performance, because the author has to norm the assessment instrument. That is, norm the instrument, and that means establish a set of baseline data, a set of data that we can then bring our client into, the clinician can bring their client to, and contrast their client's performance with the baseline data of a corresponding population. That is, we call that norming the assessment. And I think that's hidden right behind here. Right behind my picture, I'll move that. It says norming the instrument, identifying the population that the instrument is intended for, establishing a baseline against which we can compare the clients in the future that we are assessing, but in the process being beware of culture bias, a huge concern. Control for culture bias. Hope I'm being clear here. Let's continue on. Now, what does the clinician have to, the author of the assessment instrument, have to do to control for culture bias? Well, the clinician has to evaluate relations between the demographic profile of the client and the demographics of the population upon whom the assessment was normed. There should be a match. What does that mean? It means that if I come in as a clinician, I choose to say I choose to select the Goldman-Fristow test of articulation to give to my client who presents with an articulation problem, and that client, say, is bilingual, and from Guatemala, let's say. Well, I have to ask myself, this Goldman-Fristow test was designed for children to adults, quite frankly. It's a test that can be used across the lifespan. It's an articulation test, so it would be appropriate for each grade and age level that I might select this assessment for to be used with. At least I think it's for all age and grade levels. But the question is it appropriate for all cultures? Is it appropriate for bilinguals? Well, there has to be a match between the demographic of the population upon whom this was normed, meaning upon whom baseline data was collected to establish a basis for scoring, evaluating whether there's a disability or not, whether the client's behavior is typical for his age or her age or grade, and the baseline data of the population upon whom this was normed. There should be a match. By the way, this would be inappropriate, quite inappropriate for a bilingual. So I'm going to look for information that indicates that performance on the test of the demographic that includes your client's profile was equivalent to the overall mean and range of performance scores. I want to make sure that the data that's presented, the population upon whom this test was normed, this assessment instrument was normed, matches my client's demographic, the demographic of the population, meaning culture, age, etc. Well, that will require, to do that, it requires that, and I'm going to move this aside for a second, that standard scores be established for each grade or age level that the instrument is designed for. And we'll discuss how that's done in a moment.